Why is it that these things fail? Oftentimes, they started with the wrong use case. They had dirty data, so they were trying to build on a bad foundation. So, or there was no governance. They moved fast, but they didn't have the policies, procedures, and supports in place to really monitor and support that use case. So, those organizations, I love this line, that close the gap don't have better AI, they have better story. So where do you even start? Start small, pick a narrow, defined use case. Get a quick win. It won't be a huge win, but get a quick win, or capture a valuable learning opportunity, right? If it fails, you failed small, right? You failed small, and you can make adjustments, and you haven't lost the complete confidence of your full team, who are then going to say, forget it, we're never doing this again. We invested too much time, too much effort. If you invest small, you start small, and you fail small. And then build iteratively. Once you get that success, go ahead and build upon it. We'll talk about ways in which you can expand that responsibly and practically. All right, so step one, brainstorm. Sit with your team, whomever that may be, and we'll give you the slides after this too. So what are the things that are causing friction? Where are frictions in your workflow that aren't caused by systems, right? Because then you may have to go back and re-engineer the system. But what are the things that are requiring unnecessary handoffs, kind of manual coordination and orchestration? What are some of the mundane and repetitive tasks? So are there kind of medium judgment? It says low judgment here. It's really medium judgment. If it's low judgment or no judgment, you can just automate it. AI is not needed. But that are keeping your staff from doing the higher value work, right? This isn't about replacing them. This is allowing them to do the things that are leveraging their particular skills in a way that's more effective, and quite frankly, that they'll probably enjoy more, giving them better job satisfaction. Where are there things that are broken? They're automated, that they still require a human to kind of orchestrate and make some decisions along the way. What are people continually complaining about, right? We can talk about that later with some of our greenbelt agents, but where are they saying things are too clicky, it takes us too long, right? An agent might really, and what Salesforce user has ever not said that, right? How can you streamline that for them? What are routine client requests? How can you better serve those people you're serving? By making things available 24/7, by making them less dependent on the person answering the phone. And then content drafting. Where is writing text or creating assets slowing your team down? They're probably using ChatGPT for it anyway. How do you institutionalize that, right? All right. Rationalize. So you've got this huge list, right? Probably a pretty big list. So then you've got to look at each one of those ideas and rationalize it. Really ask those hard questions. Not every pain point's ready to automate, and not every nail needs an AI hammer. So before committing to a use case, put it through a really rigorous evaluation process. Is the process clearly defined and documented? In Craig's parlance, is the system already working, right? If it's not, you're just making a bad thing faster. How will this better serve your clients? How could it improve your staff's day-to-day experience, right? That's the rationalization part. Both matter equally, but how can you quantify that? What's the risk level? And I have a really good example of this that I can share later, but what's the risk level? What approvals do you need? What consents do you need? Data readiness. Do you have the data to support the use case? Is it available to the AI that you're proposing to implement? AI or traditional? Does this really need AI? Right? I think that's the trap a lot of us are falling into. We want to automate something, so therefore I need an agent to do it. Is it really an agent, or is it just automation? And then implementation complexity. How complex is this? Can you scale this down to a manageable MVP, or is this going to be a really huge investment? All right, so we're going to dig a little bit deeper into two of those boxes. The first is agentic versus traditional workflow, because again, I think this is something where people are struggling today to really have the conversations about these. The orchestration density terminology, I don't love too much, but this is pulled from a Salesforce well-architected asset. And it's really saying, look at your inputs, look at your planning and execution, and look at your goal or output. And in each of those areas, ask yourself, what does my data look like? Is my input and the structure of that input defined and structured and predictable? That's going to point towards traditional automation. If it's mixed, dynamic, unstructured, so it's all PDFs, things like that's going to point towards AI. And then if it's a mix of those, you've got some decisions to make, right? Planning and execution. Is the thing I'm doing, are there rigid rules that govern it? Is it always the case that this input should produce that output? If so, you don't need AI, right? For that piece of it. You don't need or is it autonomous? Do we want something to reason and function on its own? That would need to be AI. And again, then you've got the middle ground. And then your output. Is your output going to be structured and static? Should this input always produce this output? Or is it really that you want to just specify a goal and have the process figure out how to meet that goal or what that structure or output should look like? Generative text is one good example of this. And then you've got non-functional considerations. What is the latency involved? Everybody knows AI can take a little longer. If your goal is to process 1,000 things in 5 minutes, AI is probably not your answer, right? You need something that can be quick. The cost, it can be expensive. How are you? Look at what that credit consumption may look like. It's not the easiest thing to try to estimate, but you need to consider the cost of the AI credits and usages against the somewhat minimal or per user cost of traditional automation. Are there governor limits you're going to hit? This could be on either side. What auditability and compliance is needed? Do you need something where you've got to show an auditor, this is exactly what happened? Maybe that may be a little harder with an AI solution. And escalation. What will the escalation path look like? How do you get the human in the loop if you are considering an AI use case? And then from our data perspective, we have been conditioned, I think, in terms of data to always think more is better. I've got more data. More is definitively not better for AI. A really great example of this is I live in a high-rise here in Chicago, and they turned on an agent a couple months ago. And the very first time I interacted with our agent, I asked when the dry cleaners was open in the building. And she told me inexplicably that the dry cleaners was only open from Tuesdays and Thursdays from like 10 to 2. I'm like, I know that is not true. And luckily, it's got a little citation button. So I was able to go find the citation, which was actually from a 2020 board meeting. And guess what? In 2020, the dry cleaners was only open on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I was able to go to our management company and say, hey, you got to fine tune this. You got to have it only look at more, you got to look at the recency of the data. But it's a really good example of more is not always more or better, right? The other analogy I like to use is if you have an intern starting tomorrow or a new employee, would you give them every single manual that had ever been written about their job in the history of your company? Of course not. Of course you wouldn't do that, right? But that's what we're often doing in AI. We're saying, here's all our stuff. Go figure it out, right? And it's going to be far more likely to be wrong if you haven't curated the instructions because that's data too, right? Like we are also think about, in both those cases, you might be thinking, that's not data. That's like minutes, or that's data for an AI system. That's the context and the grounding that it's using. But the same thing's true of our structured CRM data too, right? If it's looking at too broad of a field, it's going to make incorrect assumptions. So our old way, collect everything. The new way, minimum viable data. So you're feeding the model only really good, reliable information. And some of this is you compare it out of your system, and some of it is you compare what you're making available to your AI use case, right? We're going from monolithic and brittle to modular and scalable. So this is if you are bringing data in from other systems, which we often want to do in a, if you're building, for instance, you're building in Salesforce, you're building in your CRM, you may need data from your ERP system. You may need data from something else. If you're building that integration, we've got a lot more sophisticated integration tools today that allow us to reference that data in real time, rather than necessarily replicate all of it into your system. So think about how that might reduce both your data friction, your latency, and increase the ability to kind of trim that data for the use case. That's the high latency piece as well. And then the redundant data sets, right? That kind of speaks to all three of those things. You're not creating a redundant data set. You're just referencing it in the moment. That's reducing your latency. It's reducing the ability, the chance that things will get out of sync. And then you also want to, especially important in AI, when we look at the cost, I like this concept of the legacy tax. So eliminate the legacy tax. If your AI solution has to look at 3 times the amount of data that it actually needs, it's going to cost a lot more for it to be able to do that. So, that's another really important reason to do that. And when we think about the importance of data cleanliness for an AI solution, the smaller your data set is, we know data cleansing is hard. It's hard, it's time consuming. The smaller your set is that you've got to curate and clean, the more realistic this is that you'll get this off the ground in a reasonable time frame, right? Because we all know it's one of the biggest risks of any project of any kind, right, is getting the data right. And it just is even more so in the case of AI, and it can derail your ability to do a quick MVP and iterate. Any questions about the data thing? No. Okay. All right. Step 3, prioritize. This is hard, right? Prioritization is difficult. But if you have gone through the motions on the, that we've talked about in the previous step, if you have created, you kind of now know what is going to be the impact of this solution. And then essentially the bottom is, how feasible is this? How hard is it going to be, right? And that how hard it's going to be is a combination of a lot of factors. It's, do I have the data and what's it going to take to clean it up? It is, what controls or consents do I need to get to make this happen? What internal infrastructure do we need to create to make this happen? And of course, the obvious, how hard will this be to build, right? And maintain. But all of those things go into that kind of measure of feasibility. And if you look at feasibility, it kind of goes from, on your impact side, it's easy. We go from low impact to high impact. Feasibility, we're going from low feasibility. So this is less likely to happen because it's more difficult, because it means it has regulatory challenges, to high feasibility. This will be a no-brainer, right? This is slam dunk. So where you want to live, and I think this is a great way to think of AI projects, but it's a great way to think of kind of most anything you're choosing to do. But and from a systems perspective, you want to live at first, especially in that quick wins category, right? What are those things they're going to have high impact. They're feasible. You can make this happen. That's what you want to start on and iterate. There will be time for your strategic big bets, but those are the things that are still going to have high impact, but they're going to take longer. They're going to be more challenging. You need to build both the institutional muscle, so your governance strategies, your evaluation strategies, testing strategies, your development strategies, right? You need to build that institutional muscle first with these smaller quick wins. You need to learn from those before you starting on your big bets. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is wanting to start, because that's what your board wants. That's what your CEO wants, right? They want the big giant splash. You have a risk, especially when we're thinking about AI, is where you started with your big splash might be like the AI may have gone leaps and bounds beyond you if during that time you're also having to develop all these other external supporters. So, death zone, you don't want to do those things. You're going to be tempted. People are going to want them. They're going to be somebody's pet project. You have to try to stay away from those as much as you possibly can. And then your fillers, team's got a weekend, they have a particular thing they want to explore, those fillers, they have their place. But you want to stay away from there if you want. So this quadrant is something that you're going to want to come back to every iteration, right? Because the way that you classified something the first time, you may learn something through your first project, your first 2 projects, that, oh, hey, we thought this was feasible, but we hit this roadblock in project 1 that means that, oh, this is way harder than we thought. Or the converse may be true, right? This one was deemed less feasible because there was this technical thing we couldn't get around. Well, now we've got Agentforce Grid, so hey, that moves to the top of the list, right? So this is something you're going to want to keep coming back to. Any questions or thoughts on that framework?
Yep. I was wondering if you had any examples of like trends or common quick wins.
Yes. So common quick wins later today, we're going to do a session. We're going to demo some of our pre-built agents and talk about some of the pre-built agents Salesforce has made. That's a quick win, right? A really quick win that we're seeing in Provisio right now is we just upgraded our Slack instance. And we've got Slackbot, and we've had it for 2 days, and it's really amazing. That's a really, really quick win. I literally just said, what are the things that I need to focus on today? And it told me, and it was right. Like some of them were wrong. Like some of them were things that I had already done. And so then I asked Slackbot, hey, some of these things are already done. How do I let you know next time that these things are already done, so that, you don't put them on this list? And so, it said, I really like the green checkmark emoji. So if you put a green checkmark emoji on something, I'll know that it's done and I won't have to, because it was like a meeting I scheduled externally. And I don't have any of that yet. So, but those are really good examples of quick wins. If you already have a knowledge base in Salesforce, for instance, it can be, depending upon the industry, kind of sub-vertical you're in, industry you're in, it can be a fairly simple quick win to make that accessible to the public on your website, right? It's not, if the knowledge is already built, it's already curated, it's already been using it, that can be a pretty quick win. The thing I love about that one is that with Agentforce, all you have to do is pick a language, and it will just respond in whatever language you want. So if you have a really multilingual client base, and you have knowledge articles that are only in English, it can be a great way to improve accessibility for those who speak languages other than English without your team having to redevelop and translate content. So, and the way it works is that you just ask the question in Spanish, and it's like, hey, that's Spanish, so it answers. It's pretty normal. I also have a really good example though of a strategic big bet that, so I'm going to talk about them later, but our client Pacific clinics, they were at Agentforce. They were at Dreamforce, 2 years ago when Agentforce was announced, and they're like, we have to have that. And they were already in the midst of a marketing cloud project that was going to try to work to engage people. Basically, they've got to do cold calling to a bunch of leads that they get from an insurance company to enroll them in a program. And they wanted to augment that with agents and have the agent actually interact with these folks. There were a lot of, because they wanted to text these people first, because they wanted to, interact with them with AI. There were a lot of regulatory hurdles that they had to, and contractual things that they had to address with the insurance companies that were giving them these leads, these meetings, that really bogged them down for months and months and months. So it took them far longer to get to success, and the sensitivity of the questions that the agent was answering was high, right? These are people typically with, they're on this list because they fall into these populations of focus. So they're already vulnerable folks. So they needed to make the amount of testing that they have to do was much, much higher than it would have been for like an intern, right? So they've gotten there. They're live. They got on the Dreamforce stage last year. They were the nonprofit keynote, but it took them almost a year to get that live because of those particular considerations. So they've gotten their strategic win, but it took a long time. This. And they had to learn to do some of the governance stuff along the way. Whereas had they started with something small, a lot of that governance stuff would have already been taken care of, and this thing would have flowed more. All right. So once you're live, we'll get into that piece. You have to validate and monitor. Testing an AI use case is very, very, very different than testing traditional software testing. So, and that was one of the hurdles that we faced in that project, is that we are used to a script, right? We do X, we get Y. It doesn't work like that, right? You have to say, we have an intent. What is the intent of it, right? Because it's going to say something a little bit different every time. And you might change the LLM that's working behind the scenes, and doesn't mean just because it's different that it's broken. It just means that it's different. So is it measuring intent is a lot different than just checking a box and saying, yes, I got the right answer. So testing is a very different animal. So it helps. That's why you need to define your goals first. Because if you don't know the intent, you don't know what you're going for, it's going to be really hard to measure against it. What does working look like, right? What are the things that are most critical? You build your MVP, right? Resist, scope, create. That's true of every project ever, right? People are trying to throw things in. Evaluate the agent behavior. That's what I was talking about. That's different than what we're used to, especially when we're talking about an agent. There are some tools that allow you to do that in the Salesforce platform. And they have a really good trail, actually, that's relatively new on this. Assessing agent behavior is a really good one to get started if you're interested in that. Monitor continuously. They finally, a couple months ago, made good observability tools available, especially on Salesforce. But even, regardless of platform, make sure that there's a feedback loop for your team. Like I said, my agent back at, my building, I was able to look at that, and I was able, there was a way in which I was able to provide feedback, and that was really important to being successful. And then run a retrospective. What worked great, what is working great, and what's not. The thing I loved hearing is I was in a meeting to actually close out the project finally for Pacific Clinics last week. And because while it's been live, they were working on governance and observability and all these things. And they were talking about Hope, who is their agent. They're like, oh, she's gotten so much better. Like, they're talking about her like a person. And it was really kind of cool to see. All right. And then you're going to iterate and grow. And there's ways in which you can do this. This doesn't mean you necessarily have to start over with another use case, right? You can add scope to your agent. In their case, they've added Spanish, and they're continuing to add knowledge articles so it can answer additional questions. You can increase your data context. That's the add knowledge articles part, right? Or give it more work. Say you're doing a case manager internal agent. Maybe you make more things available to it. Maybe it was just doing a client summary, summarizing case notes. Now you make it, maybe you were allowed to interact with goals and say, okay, what are their goals? Say this goal's done, log a service. Now you're going to add the ability to generate case notes or some case note summary, excuse me. fine tune for better results, right? Take that feedback, look at your results, look at the conversations or sample conversations, and add additional logic. And then once you've done all that, then you can start working on your next use case. Return to that magic quadrant, like I said, with fresh eyes. Your learnings are going to sharpen your instincts, and you're going to get better and better at choosing the right use case. And this is just the full framework at a glance. Brainstorm, rationalize, prioritize, validate, iterate, and you're just going to keep doing that. And then I kind of threw this in. It's not really with the topic, but I think it's really important, as I called out, because this is where you can kind of get stuck. Start thinking now, even before your first use case, what does import your second if you're already doing stuff? What is that governance framework that you have? If you've got this, people are clear where to go. It's going to make your adoption better. It's going to make your review. You're going to get improved results. So what are the principles that you have behind AI? Because I can tell you, if you haven't built an AI use case, it doesn't mean you're not using AI. People in your organization are using AI. It's inevitable. And if they're doing it without guidance and without a framework, you're just putting yourself and your organization at risk. Regulations. As I said, they had to look at all the regulations around testing because that's how they were introducing people to Hope. And they had to look at, different things. So Illinois, if you don't know, they're the first state in the country to regulate AI in therapy. And so, the regulations are continually changing. So it's important to have ownership of that. Who's owning that? Who's keeping on top of that? Inventory. How are they using it today? Because we know they are. Evaluate risk. So what are the particular risk factors that pertain to this use case? And they're going to differ from internal use case to external. And the way you mitigate those is going to change as well. Some of that's going to be policy. Some of that's going to be technical. And then again, iterate. What does that iteration look like? Do you have a committee that's going to decide on investments and what those next investments are going to be? Does it rest with the program owner or program manager who's going to decide how to use it in their particular program area? Is it concentrated in IT, right? Who's making those determinations? So some questions to carry back to your team. What are the things we do every day that a well-trained agent could do better or faster? Where do clients reach out to us again and again for the same things? How can we make their experience better? What are the things you could hand over to an intern if you have one next month? I like to think of agents in particular as interns. They don't know much at the beginning. You got to give them really clear instructions. You got to tell them what their job is. You got to give them really good data, and they'll get better. So again, they're already there. You just have to unearth them and prioritize them. All right. Well, thank you.